start out with a little bit of news.
Yes. All right. Exciting news coming up. The new Wagadu Chronicles promises to be an ambitious Afro fantasy Kickstarter that is going to be for D&D 5e, and it's a setting that draws from African mythology and tradition. There are also going to be plans for an added MMO for PC that focuses on in-character role-playing. There will be 7 lineages to choose from to build your character that will replace the traditional races of D&D. So that's going to be interesting. They did not outline what those lineages are going to be, but they have a team of people working on the game to make sure that it fits historically with African traditions. It also features the core roles of fantasy RPG like paladin, bard, cleric, barbarian, druid, fighter, monk, hunter, etc. But there will be room for more class variation and customization in the actual PC MMO. So that's going to be exciting. It's another Afro fantasy. This one is not official. This is not official Wizard stuff, but it will be for D&D 5e. So take a look at their Kickstarter. It's going to be interesting.
That sounds really cool. All right, for any of you out there who play Fallout Wasteland Warfare, Motifius has announced a pretty big expansion coming. It's called the Mojave expansion, or the Mojave expansion, I guess. And it's not just going to be like one unit, but it's got two entirely brand new factions, the Caesar's Legions and the NCR. Included in the release, there's going to be a new 2-player starter set, so players can get into the game quick and easy with just this one purchase. So if you're new to Wasteland Warfare, you could jump in right with this. And it sounds like the new expansion is going to hit store shelves early next year. But, in the days of COVID, who knows what that actually means? It could be early next year, it could be spring, I don't know. But for all you Fallout fans out there, this is something to look forward to.
Awesome. Yeah. All right.
Are we ready to introduce these two dudes?
Yes, we are. So today's episode is going to be very interesting. This is role play. This is costuming for all-day play. No, it isn't. As I said, no, we already did that one. Lindsay, which I don't have it in front of me. Which one is this?
Today we're going to be talking about proper weapons carrying systems
for
LARPing, for cosplay, for reenactment. Basically, a lot of you guys want to be these epic characters, Viking shield maidens and pirates and the Witcher, and a lot of those come with weapons. And if you're not an experienced swordsman, how do you carry those and look like you know what you're doing, you don't hurt yourself, you don't hurt other people, especially if you are in a convention setting. So those are a lot of the things that we're going to talk about today, and I'm sure there'll be many other things because these two guys bring an amazing wealth of information with them. Who are they?
Who do we got? Okay. All right. First up, we have Garry Ledford. He is a historical reenactor who portrays Renaissance materials, the golden age of piracy, Victorian steampunk, Western and Irish War of Independence, all that good stuff. He's got more costuming than any human being that I know on the planet, including himself.
He's a lot.
He's got so much. He can costume an entire Ren Fair. He's also an Eastern and Western martial artist with over 25 years of experience and a HEMA tournament competitor with medals in several categories. I have seen this man fight at tournaments. He is absolutely amazing. He'll blow your mind. And he's so fast. You are so quick with your movements. God damn, Garry. Garry has put his training and experience to use performing in fights and choreography and stunts for independent films, TV pilots, music videos, documentaries, and live martial arts and theatrical demonstrations. He has also been playing Dungeons and Dragons, get this, since 1985. That is longer than I've been alive on this planet. And along with your host, was fortunate enough to perform the live stunt combat show for WOTC's Stream of Many Eyes.
Oh, that was a fun weekend.
Oh, it was a fun weekend. There were many laughs to be had, and nobody got stabbed for real.
Nope. Hashtag.
Yeah, nobody. Yeah, I didn't think about that.
All right. And next to Garry, we have Paul Suda, who is an unfrocked medieval times knight and ex-jouster for Full Metal Jousting. Yes, if you went to medieval times, he was one of those epic people from there. He is also a historical European martial artist. You might have recognized him from Deadliest Warrior, Gameology's Experts React. This was my favorite part that I'd never known about you, Paul, and I just learned. He was a professional merman. Like, how cool is that? I was like, what? I am
Where were you a professional merman?
He was a professional merman. He's
no,
all
where? Where did you have this, I'm asking you right now, where did you have this job?
Well, I worked for Shiro's Entertainment in the Los Angeles area. It's Virginia Hankins' company.
Okay.
I got into it originally because I was helping Virginia and Jessica Drew Johnson. Jessica Drew Johnson is an amazing person. I'd recommend talking to her on this, especially talking about cosplaying and costume designing. She's a spectacular costume model. But I was helping them with some underwater modeling photo shoots, and she started doing mermaids for parties and photography. And mermaid camps, like teaching folks how to swim in the tail, and it's kind of caught on.
Wow.
So I was the merman for a little while.
That is epic.
That is fantastic. I love that.
I love that so much. He also produced and was the fight designer for Tower of Joy, which was a Game of Thrones fan film. You can find that on YouTube. I highly suggest you watch it. It's very impressive. Sword fighting, horseback riding, all of it. And he's also he is a co-writer of the big screen adaptation of the X-Crawl tabletop RPG, which I am very, very excited about. Also, longtime tabletop board gamer, RPGer, all of those great things, and currently works as a bodyguard. So these are our two amazing guests today. So excited.
All right. Let's start off with sword. Like, how should you wear a sword? Like, the biggest thing that I see that kind of bugs me all the time is long swords on the back. So let's start with long swords on the back. All of the Witcher.
Yes.
All of the Witcher style. What are your opinions? What are the logistics of that? Is it possible? Like, why?
Come on, Garry.
I swore an oath I would not bring up backstabbards when you just started with backstabbards.
No,
I'm just so glad you brought it up.
I cut my finger and swore I wouldn't bring up backstabbards.
It's the thing that people want to know. They want to know if they can do it. Like,
Wonder Woman hit it in her dress pretty epically. I mean, does that count as a scabbard? That was like a dress scab? I don't know.
Right, the Wonder Woman thing where, yeah.
Well,
you gotta hide it.
Well, Garry, let's tag team it up. Garry, you start, but let's shit on this for a while. But just Garry, you start, and let's do it.
As I do, guys. So the first question you asked is how to wear a backscabbard. My initial answer is don't.
Don't do it.
Just don't.
Now, I have a caveat to that. I actually brought a back scabbard that I had made for wearing a dagger at Renaissance Fair. I'll grab that out while Paul's talking and then demonstrate, but it's not what you think it is. That having been said, I'm also a leather worker, and I've made back scabbards for cosplayer Jess. I made her a Deadpool, close to screen accurate as I could get with leather back scabbard. I made that, the one she wore at LA Comic Con.
I saw it. It looked amazing.
Yeah, it really did.
But the talking first about safety, that the whys and wherefores of back scabbards is, it is virtually impossible to pull the sword, and it is impossible to put it back, especially if you're concerned about safety, because you can't see it. It's going back a leaf holder.
Come on, guys.
But Geralt of Rivia, Geralt of Rivia takes it off, pulls the sword, puts it back, and puts it back on his back. He doesn't try to do this because it doesn't work.
Right.
Going back to, again, talking about safety, I know a lot of people, when they LARP, it looks cool, so they want to wear back scabbard. If you're doing like an adventure LARP, where it's supposed to be an environment where you could get into a fight, where you're representing the tavern, you're out interacting in a free play environment. Okay, nobody's going to grab the sword in your back and yank you over backwards because it's a LARP. However, if you were in a real situation, if you were really in a tavern in an adventure, that's exactly what would happen. And if anybody's had their sword and back scabbard grabbed and yanked backwards, it doesn't go well for you. You literally go over backwards and you're done. And it probably threw your back out.
Well, and I imagine if you're like in, combat, like say, some of those week-long like Viking, LARPing things that they have, and you're in the middle of combat and you don't have your sword, like the bad guy could just come and take your sword, I imagine, too.
Oh, yeah. or the rogue hiding over the doorway,
or just anybody wanting to be a jerk, really.
Or anybody wanting to be a jerk. So
plenty of those out there, especially in a place with alcohol.
Yeah. Paul, what are your thoughts? I see you pontificating on this. Yeah. Paul.
Well, because there's four of us, I want to be patient. I don't want us to overlap too much. But let's all sort of step back and somewhat give the devil his or her due here. With the back, carrying a sword on one's back. What I would say in defense of this sort of what's become an anachronistic sort of staple of fantasy and live action role playing and costuming and even TV and film adaptations of these things, it's become a thing that's really normal that shouldn't be normal. But in defense of the idea, you can kind of tack it onto something else that's anachronistic and stupid and shouldn't be real, but is just become a trope, is the knight errant idea of like one, a lone person who is wearing armor and carrying large weapons and has a horse that has no one around helping him or her to do this. That is completely non-historical. If you're being a warrior that has all that kind of stuff, especially equipment like a lance, like a horse, like really good armor, chances are good you're not a mercenary. You're probably something like a knight, and a knight is kind of like a fighter pilot or a tank driver. There has to be a lot of other people, like support staff types, at the very least a squire, like a la Monty Python, just carrying your shit on his back, like running behind you with his coconuts. So like in real life, you'd be riding a horse, and there'd be one or two or more other horses, and you're at least one squire, or maybe more than one squire, following you around. And you wouldn't necessarily wear your fighting armor when you're riding around, walking around, exploring.
Right.
You would put on your kit that's very tiring to put on and very tiring to wear for long periods of time. You'd put that on for when you expect to be fighting. You would, have, here comes the big sword out of the scabbard, or the sword would, or like a hand and a half sword that would be on your horse's saddle. It has a place where you can get at it after you use your real primary weapon, which is your lance or your axe. So there's places where these things are going to be that are the responsibility of the animal you're using, or the lower class people following you around to be helping you with.
Right.
So if it's just you, I understand where this comes from. If you're just walking around and you want to carry a large weapon and be able to, use your hands for other things besides holding that large weapon, it makes sense to have it on your back. So that giving someone their due, giving the devil his or her due, it makes sense to do that, especially when you're not fighting at the moment. But like Garry pointed out very aptly, if you suddenly have to be fighting, even if you have your kit on, if you have to be fighting right now, well, then your little dagger that comes out, in half a second is what you're fighting with. You don't have time to unsling and scabbard that, whatever that big thing is. And or if you don't unsling it, it's a handle they can grab to make you go over into the mud and be drowning in mud. So I want to sort of acknowledge that this came from somewhere, and it makes sense in the kind of artificial circumstances in which we sort of find ourselves in a fantasy setting in which, no one wants to play your peon squire, But
that needs to be a thing. I mean, well, and to be fair, people who are like LARPing and cosplaying and doing conventions and all of that, like, I understand, like, a lot of them are doing it for the fantasy element, and that's what they're, excited about. But Garry, you do a lot of reenacting, which you are trying to be historically accurate, correct?
Absolutely. And back scabbards were not a thing. Like Paul said, carrying a weapon on your back for a soldier that was carrying like a big two-handed sword, whether it was a German Landsknecht or a Swiss mercenary, or even Spanish, a fighter in what was called a tercio, they had the spadoneros, which were the swordsmen. They fought with what's known as a montante, which is a sword about as tall as a man. It would about conform to the D&D two-handed sword, or the great sword. Carrying it on your back, kind of like how the old 1930s trope of a hobo with a knapsack, where it's kind of on a stick or on a rope and tied and over your back. Absolutely. And then when you need it, you just let go of the rope and there it is. But there was no intricate baldric with this cool thing that you lift and it pops off these awesome hooks, and then you can just draw it a couple inches and it pops free. No, not a thing.
I forgot. I did a thing where I had knives. I did have blades in the back, and it was a film, and I could get it. We did a shot, and we're like, and it was like, cut. And then, like, I had to have two people come pull it out for me, and then it's just like,
right. Well, like,
now.
Yeah, like Deadpool with the double staffs. It's like, okay, if they're, the X, great, I can pull them out. But like you said, like, where's the Rogue, I need your help, It's like...
Yeah, those blades weren't too long either. They were more like machete like size. They weren't even a long sword. They were short.
Right.
Kind of on that. So now we know how both of you feel about swords on the back. This is a question from personal experience. Maybe I was doing it wrong or whatever, but it also has to do with weapons on the back. So strung bows. So when you have a bow and it's already strung, and then you like slip it over, and then you got the string like that's across your body, but the riser and the limbs are behind you. I used to do that with my bow, or I tried rather, and I'm like, this is really tight on my chest, and the whole thing and it was a recurve too.
Yeah,
so there was
I shoot with.
It was a recurve, so there was space, but at the same time, the whole thing like slips down, so it's like kind of like the top of it is here, and then the bottom is kind of like hanging. Is that a thing? Do people like do that historically? Like, is that like a historically accurate way of carrying an actually strung bow, or is it more so like you get to the battlefield, you string it, and then you're kind of just stationary the whole time, so you don't have to do too much moving, or if you do move, you just carry it like a normal person?
I will go to the mounted part. I know that mounted archers would typically have a saddle scabbard for the bow when it's strung, and it would rest in that, like similar to a gun or a sword scabbard mounted to your saddle. For somebody on foot, I don't know exactly how historical the carrying it on your back is. I imagine woodmen and archers typically carried it in hand, especially dedicated archers. Let's say Battle of Agincourt, England. You had your English archers, which, you know, made the battle, the win for the English, other than stupid French knights walking in mud. And it was, Paul's like, they typically carried their bow pre-strung, because when you had 100 to 150 pound bows, stringing them on a fly is not something you can do really fast.
Yep.
So,
I mean, I have a 60 and I'm like, sometimes, yeah.
As long as it's not raining, and which will stretch your bowstring, you're going to carry it strung in your hand until it's time to unstring it if it's raining. So carrying it in a scabbard at the ready, I imagine it wouldn't be too hard to build a scabbard that would hold, let's say, the bottom third of your bow on your hip just next to a quiver, already in a strung position, and shape it that way.
Right.
But what do you do with the rest of the bow? It's going to be maybe over the shoulder. That's one I don't have expertise on. So,
right. Even if you did it kind of like a frog, where you just kind of have like with snaps or something, or like a hook thing on your belt. But like
Depends how big it is.
Like taking the bow,
like if you're a longbowman, you know, like if you were a Viking longbowman, or you know, even English longbow, like those are you know 150 pound bows. Now, if it's a horse bow, I mean, that is much smaller and more compact, but yeah.
Now, I imagine with the scabbard I mentioned, you still could do the over-the-shoulder thing. It would actually make it convenient, because it wouldn't just drop to where the bowstring and the bow itself are pushing on your shoulder. It would hold it at the proper height. So,
because like Merida carries her bow that way, where she just like throws it over her shoulder, and it like magically stays like perfectly center, where you got like top.
Well, I'm thinking Legolas held his most of the time, but I guess he held it most of the time.
He put it in his quiver sometimes, but it looked like he unstrung it before he did that.
It did, yeah. And those were the smaller, like those were meant for like shooting around trees, not like, you know, clout shooting or anything.
Well, the other thing is, I mean, again, the trouble that we have with, and you know this, with video games and movies is you can have like 5 or however many different kinds of the same prop, and this prop is for putting in here, this prop is for close-ups because it looks perfect, this prop is for beating the crap out of other props, this prop is rubber, or this prop is half of a prop because the CG is going to make you cut people up, and that's what the CG is.
Witcher. What?
Witcher.
Yeah, you can just have different versions of the same prop and cut between them, and no one's the wiser. But if you're walking around with an actual thing, you have to decide what that actual thing is going to be and what it's going to do. And what, you know, if the thing is actually for fighting or shooting or whatever it's for, then it's not going to necessarily be as cooperative as a thing that is made specifically to be a costume piece that looks nice, you know, in your quiver, or in your scabbard or whatever it is. You know, it's like the something that the people at Chicago Swordplay Guild made the distinction of, especially in their beginner classes, was, you know, there's swords and then there's sword-shaped objects, and the question is, you know, are you, you know, is this a sword that you're looking at, or is it a sword-shaped object? Even if it's a very pretty wall hanger without where the, you know, the piece of metal that looks like the sword blade ends at the handle, well, that's a sword-shaped object, because, you know, an actual sword, the piece of metal that makes it the sword blade extends all the way to the end of the sword, so it can vibrate out. So that, again, it depends what your objective is. If you want to carry around a bow that really works, well, then you're going to kind of deal with the fact that you're carrying around a bow that really works, especially if you want to string or unstring it quickly. If the bow has a heavy pull, that's going to be annoying to do.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
So from your experience, either say at a convention or LARPing or reenacting or even on sets, what is something that you've seen someone do that just like drove you crazy, as far as like how they were either carrying the weapon or handling the weapon, and you're just like, oh my God, stop?
Well, this is a really good question. I mean, I'll kind of go in descending order, and I don't actually have like an insane laundry list of this, but there are different things that are really obvious especially once you're looking for them.
Yeah.
I'm going to go straight from just the camera's rolling and like this is what's on camera and it ends up in the final product and it's even written into the script or whatever it is, or it's in a book you're reading or in a comic you're reading. The thing that drives me, I'd say, the most crazy about sort of anachronistic or fantasy settings or so-called historic settings with with weapons is people walk around with their swords unsheathed, like they're carrying a pointer for a chalkboard, or they're using their weapon to sort of gesture at someone or pointing it at someone that they're not actually planning on having a fight with. But they're just sort of using. I mean, again, relatively modern demonstrations of Shakespeare dramas could do this, where someone draws a weapon, and they're talking with it. They're not fighting with it. I mean, whatever the rules of your world that you've made up that you're living in, this is a weapon. Like let's just completely drop the setting. If you're in a modern setting and you're just like talking with your gun and no one acts like you're talking with a gun that's loaded, you start to not really respect the danger of the weapon. It's like, oh, it's just a gun. It's like, no, that's a gun. Like, don't point that at people you're not trying to kill right now. Like, put it away. Talk to people.
On the trigger. That's like my biggest pet peeve when I've been on sets and like, they yell and the actor's just standing there with their finger on the trigger and you're just like, stop. Take it off.
Even if it's a blank weapon, like that can hurt somebody.
Yeah.
I do that with an accidental discharge. When a weapon.
Actors have died on set. I mean, come on, the court.
I was standing 2 feet from a guy who had an accidental discharge on a Western documentary, and let me tell you, the whole world stops when that happens. The director, everything just like, what? And then, okay, how did that happen? Let's figure it out and make sure it doesn't happen again. But yeah, that's terrifying.
Okay.
So a pointy weapon is different.
Yeah. So remembering that your weapon is a weapon, even if it's a prop or,
Well, the other thing, and again, the thing that makes me, the most angry I am about this circumstance isn't exactly, I mean, yes, of course, people on the set, not being safe or not taking it seriously, of course. But like the reason that they act that way is because the fiction so frequently treats them like toys and like not real things that, again, same thing with guns. Like we just sort of act like guns are these things we could just like wave around. And it's like, no, that's not, I mean, and to contrast it, generally speaking, when I see, I'd say especially Japanese movies, Tokugawa era sort of samurai dramas, if someone has their sword out, they're fighting. And when they're done fighting, the sword goes away. Like there's no talking with the sword and using the sword as a way to, talk or gesture to people. It's like, no, like swords out, fight, dead people, swords away. That's what, and to kind of bring it back to some historical context, even though there's some, very corrupt lords of the land in medieval Europe and different periods of medieval history. Generally speaking, if you were, walking around in a populated area and you had a weapon, and even if you were allowed to carry that weapon because of your class or whatever, if you like drew it out a little bit, that's attempted murder. Like the law could come down on you and punish you for like, yo, you can't draw that. Like, was someone attacking you? What are you doing? Like, that's not okay. And if the Lord was corrupt and you were his relative, like whatever, but like if the Lord was not corrupt or he didn't like you, it's like, tell everybody in the court who's not happy with you why you did that. It's like,
well, and I know,
not okay.
And then I know, like, Steve, we've had on the show before, he's told the story how with Asian weapons, like partially drawing your sword in and of itself was a threat. It was like, okay, I don't know how I feel about you. I'm partially drawing it. Am I going to fully draw it or not? That depends what happens here in the next couple seconds.
Yeah. It's like putting your hand on the pistol in the Western. It's like, are you gonna, that whole thing?
Right.
Garry, you tell some stories now. I just went on a tear. So not your turn.
Well, getting back to back scabbards, I was going to show you guys a back scabbard that I have.
Oh, do it.
Absolutely. So this is one think I had this one made for me by a buddy of mine. And this is
Oh,
Yeah, you're right.
There you go. It goes out.
Yes. And it's not a full sword. It is, yeah, exactly.
It's more of a butt scabbard.
yeah, well, yeah, and I can't put it back in. Once I do that, I have to remove the scabbard to put the sword back in.
Can you like twist it to the front?
You could, but not if I had a pouch and a rapier and 7 other things on the belt.
Right.
But that's again, it makes it readily accessible for the fight. Putting it back after the fight is really not something you need to hurry up and do, assuming you won the fight. So you can take your time on that. That's the other thing. It's not always really easy to put weapons away. Some carriages that were built for war did try to make it that way. That was why the sword is often worn just on the side. However, after the battle, it's not really a priority to hurry so much. So you might have to take a little time. Yeah. Hence why people trying to put their sword back in the back scabbard kind of grinds my gears.
Okay. So that's one of your pet peeves. Do you have any others?
Not really a pet peeve, but something I've seen a lot at Reenactment and even at Renaissance Fair that I get a little iffy about. Let me grab another prop here. And so when you're marching in line and fighting, if you're carrying a spear or a pike or another kind of soldier of the line type weapon, they would be carried up on the shoulder. However, when I was a firefighter hotshot for the Forest Service, the first thing they taught us the first day of training was do not carry a sharp tool on your shoulder. Because I've got a razor sharp, brush cutting axe, Pulaski, whatever, on my shoulder, and the blade is right here. For instance.
So basically, don't be Gimli, is what I'm hearing.
Don't carry this on your shoulder. Because if I fall or I'm pushed or anything else. Now, for a firearm, of course, they carry it on the shoulder because the business end goes up. This does not have an up business end. This has a straight ahead business end, or whichever direction. Now, something like this, carried in the hand, you can carry it in one hand, even turn it this way, and now you have Gimli's walking axe. Mm-hmm. But longer weapons, pole weapons with the business end high up, sure, that's a little different. Because that way you're not going to turn around and stab the guy behind you if it's 8 feet in the air. But this, you don't carry this on your shoulder. That's a terrible idea. If it's a foam LARP weapon, okay. But if you're ever carrying something real at a Renaissance fair or a reenactment or other events, don't put that on your shoulder. That's one of my pet peeves.
Okay. I love it.
Trying to think of other unsafe things.
I like how we go from pet peeves to safety.
Tells us
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, no. It tells us exactly that you guys are good people. Because it's like, all right. So
well, we're at least not suicidal people.
Right. Well, I mean, obviously there's other things you can talk about. Like if you're doing reenactment, like I used to work at an 18th century colonial farm, and it's like, they had very strict standards. Like, do not show up with your machine stitched clothing that is a hybrid of fabric that didn't exist back in the 18th century. It's like little things like that. Like those are pet peeves. It's like, okay. But, with weapons, pet peeves often equal safety because, and that's one thing that I've seen either at conventions or on sets or anything. It's like people who aren't familiar with weapon handling, like you were saying, Paul, just forget that they have it sometimes and just are nonchalant, where those of us who've been trained as weapon handlers, we're very aware of, like if it's a firearm, muzzle awareness, where's our finger on the trigger? If it's a sword, where's the pointy end pointing,
Well, and like I said, also again, I'm going to keep banging on this. It's not just the folks who are doing it. It's like our culture has, to an extent, turned these things into sort of cute, fun props, and what it does, and that ends up diminishing the power of when they're used the way they're supposed to be used, or when they're treated with respect. So you might, I'm sure this has happened to you. You might be on a set and you're planning to act properly and safely. You know, even if you're planning on drawing and doing something that's action oriented with a weapon, and maybe the director is like, oh, could you like draw your weapon earlier and talk about stuff? You know, like it's not just me. The writer might be dumb and write something like that, or a director might want to up the drama, but with something that's, you know, kind of a cheap way to up drama. It can't just be the responsibility of the performers and practitioners to sort of like, no, like this is for killing people or defending yourself in an acute situation. And that's what it's for. And if you try to use it for other things, or if we pretend like it's a toy, then, well, like I would say the cynical version of me is like, well, the audience is going to check out if you devalue or debase what this thing is for. And like, because, and again, it just sort of, it feeds into itself. You know, people treat swords like toys because, you know, so much of the fiction they're exposed to sort of trains them to treat swords like toys.
That's like we haven't used swords in combat, you know, like we're not watching, you know, the Iraq War with soldiers running around with swords and lances and rapier, like we're watching Firearm. So maybe it's kind of like that disconnect that the only experience people have with, you know, swords or medieval weapons or anything is through media, television, movies, video games. Unless, like you guys, you are trained in the art of sword combat.
Yeah.
Right. Actually, it is the only type of weapon that they will sell at Disneyland now. Like, because they got rid of all their Star Wars firearms, like blaster weapons. But lightsabers and knight swords are and like the bow and arrow stuff, because they have one that they do for Gaston and one for Merida. Those are fine, apparently. Those are okay. But
well,
like
we can have a whole conversation about lightsaber safety, because that's a whole other thing. What about crossbow? We need Steve back for that one to talk about lightsabers. Like, you have no idea how many conversations we have had about like the practical usage of lightsabers, and like, oh, he would have just stabbed himself in the back with that. But I know we talked about bows and arrows. What about crossbows? Is there a specific way for carrying that? I mean, obviously, you're not going to probably carry it with the bolt already loaded, but
unloaded.
I would
unloaded.
Is that another situation where like you could have it hanging? Because, you know, they're a lot more compact than regular bows. You could have it like hanging. Okay. Paul says, I don't know. Gary says yes.
On the back, on the belt, wherever you can hold it. You're not there. It takes too long to string and unstring them. So typically, if you're in a battle situation, keeping it strung makes sense. But, you know, carry it however it's comfortable and not loaded. Don't carry it cocked, because that will, even if it's not loaded, that will weaken the bow and the string. And a misfire and a crossbow, even if it's not loaded, can really wake you up in the morning if you carried it on your back.
Oh,
but yeah, don't carry it cocked, and that's it. However it's comfortable.
I would say I would kind of return to the, like, you know, wear a prop, do not wear a weapon like that. I would say it's not a good. That's a bad weapon to wear, I would say. But I mean, even okay, if it's not strung and if it's not cocked and if it's not loaded, like, okay, best case scenario is you don't damage something that's probably expensive that you might want to use sometime.
Yeah.
And like worst case scenario is you hurt yourself and others. I would say like have a separate. I mean, and this might be a legitimate thing to tell people. It's like if you're, you know, because if you have income you're disposing of to sort of make your costume and have weapons, it's like, well, it would be reasonable to sort of, here's the stuff that I wear because it looks cool to wear, and here's the stuff that, you know, that might be fun to play with, you know, in a certain environment. Or to use, but those things are expensive and dangerous, and maybe keeping those worlds separate might be the best thing.
Right. Well, because that's a good point. Like if we're talking, and if both of you guys obviously have large sword collections, you know, there is a big difference between, like, say, you know, the scene we're working on right now, the swords that we're using for training, the swords that we're going to use for shooting, the swords that Garry, you use at combat, for your HEMA competitions, and there is a price difference for all of those. So, what are kind of some of the, the differences between and uses between all those different, iterations, and then the swords you just buy and hang up on your wall?
Garry, you talk. You tell him.
You don't want to break the expensive stuff, obviously. I don't typically own wall hangers. Most of my wall hangers are actual swords, and I would wear them out to an event, but I know what I'm getting into. It's really heavy. I have to be careful with it. It's another safety aspect is tying your sword in. If you're carrying a steel sword, tie it down, put a strap on it, a piece of leather, a ribbon, something that will hold it in so it can't be drawn. Whether or not that's historically accurate, some people say yes, some people say no. It's called a peace knot, but it
could be a zip tie.
Yeah, the zip tie.
Ren fairs often require these things because they don't want drunken people.
Yes. Actors don't have to zip tie theirs, but they have to show that it is tied in place when they walk in.
Right.
It has to be strapped.
Conventions, you have to have that now.
Yeah, conventions and Ren Fair, and I'm incredibly grateful for those rules, especially at Ren Fair.
Weapons checks now at Comic-Con, San Diego Comic-Con, LA Comic-Con, they had to institute weapons checks where they make sure it is, and if you do not have they have zip ties right there, and they will send it to your back.
They have hot glue to glue down all moving pieces, and I've done it. I've done it before. I've actually shown up with my stuff glued together, and I'm like, look at all this hot glue on here. Aren't you proud of me? And they're like, here's your get out. Good job.
Here's your green tag that we put on you. Yeah.
Here's your zip tie. Thank you. Go.
Yeah. So going back to who's talking? Garry? Paul?
What?
Garry disappeared.
Garry disappeared.
Putting on his
he's getting dressed.
So we've done a lot of talking about things you shouldn't do, but we should probably talk about things you can do that are a good idea. Yeah. Period sword rig for a rapier, Renaissance era. Notice the sword swings behind me. Let me back this up a little bit.
Like a tail.
Yeah.
The sword goes behind me, not so much that it hits my foot when I walk, but it doesn't sway out and smack people when I walk by. I know where it is. It's in my own footprint going forward, as it were.
It's in your bubble.
Yeah. And a little bit of practice, you get. It's fun because you do it for a while. You get kind of a swagger down when you walk with it. They actually call it the swagger at Southern Fair. You learn how to walk with the rhythm with the sword as it shakes. And then as you walk, the sword just kind of moves behind you like a tail with the same rhythm of your walking. They call that the swagger. And
I like that.
Use your cloak.
Yeah. Whoa, that's fantasy stuff. Cloak. Or medieval.
Hey, whatever it is.
Yeah. And along with the sword, of course, you have to have the dagger. Can be worn down, can be worn straight. I prefer mine this way. Notice there is a big leather knot tying it in, so it doesn't come out. Of course, it was tied fast. There we go. It was a slip knot, which I don't recommend that for Renaissance Fair, but I like to get mine out fast. One of the principal reasons for the anybody who's not trained in swordplay that the sword is worn on the hip, it was easy to get to. Your hips can hold a lot of weight. Soldiers, police officers, everybody who carries heavy gear, the weight all rests on the hip. After a whole long day, sure, it gets uncomfortable, but it's the easiest place on your body mechanically to rest weight, other than your shoulders. In sword fighting, when you draw the sword, in most systems of fighting, the first position you draw in their fighting system, whether it's rapier or other weapons, is straight out and up. That is the first position. The camera's backwards. That is the first position. Because it is the first position your sword goes to when you draw it from the scabbard.
Gotcha.
I don't know.
And here's a
Same-
fun little thing that I'm not 100% on this, but I heard it from my original stage combat teacher. I'm just going to say this, and people can correct me later. The reason why men's pants and shirts button the direction they button, and I'm not sure why women's button the other way. I don't really understand that, but the reason that men's, so the buttons are this way, so that the flap goes this way. The reason is so when you draw your sword across your body, the cross doesn't get caught on your clothes.
Oh.
So we have this, the business suit is an evolution of the military uniform. Well, the button direction is essentially a relic of, well, we don't want our swords to get caught on our clothes when we're drawing.
Well, and that being said, so that is also presuming that everyone is fighting right-handed.
Yeah, which is not a bad presumption because more folks are right than left-handed, but it's like we're 9% of the world population. So along with that brings up a really good point. So if you have your sword like Garry had it, and you're walking with other people, or I don't know, your significant other, was there a specific side that did people have to be aware of what side they are walking next to you, or is there any protocol when it comes to you must walk on the left side or anything like that for other people? What do you think, Garry? I think it would probably just be different depending on where you were. But
it would 100% depend on culture. But at the same time, one thing I have learned from walking with it is you really have to hold your arm out really far, because chances are she was wearing some sort of large and or hoopish skirt, depending on where you're in. So you don't end up with your arm here on a lady's arm. It's like out here. And she's
you're not supposed to have your hands in there, Garry.
Skirts are a thing. They made hoop skirts to keep the men who had swords at a far enough distance. My mind is just blown right now. I don't know if that's a thing. Seems like a thing.
We're backwards engineering the 5-foot square.
Right.
Right, exactly. That's how women have their bubble. They're like, nope, you can stay away. It's like the panniers in the Louis XIV era, where it's just like 14 feet across, and you're just like, oh my god. Like, you have to have a clear room to cross through there.
What about shields? We haven't covered shields. Obviously, there's sword and buckler. There's the Viking shields. There's the Greek shields. There's, all different types. How were those used? How were those carried? Were they?
You go, Garry. I'm not super confident about my opinions about this.
Well, you're the one who once you talk about
you competed sword and buckler, so yeah.
Yeah, buckler is different from other weapons, from other shields.
Smaller.
In that buckler,
people are familiar with the buckler. It's a tiny,
Well, dinner plate sized or smaller.
Buckler, please. See if I can get a squire to bring me a buckler. Buckler, please.
And that's how you have people carry your shield, squire. Get someone else to do it. That's what I would do. You're like, hey, this is pretty big and heavy. Please, somebody else.
The buckler was actually worn on the belt quite often. They didn't strap to your wrists. Sorry, role-playing games. They were carried in the hand. They're held in the center boss. And they were often carried at the belt.
Yeah.
Right next to your sword. So you'd have a piece of leather, and the buckler would tie underneath your sword in the scabbard.
Okay.
And when you walk, it makes this cool swashing noise. And that's one of the reasons they postulate is for the term swashbuckler, because it makes this noise when you walk. And then you draw your sword, and then the strap that holds the buckler is free, and you pull the buckler, and now you have a sword and buckler.
Ooh, okay. Now, what about the bigger shields, like people who've been watching Vikings and Game of Thrones, and, clashing with Titans?
I would say this sort of is a nice way to blend into sort of and we've sort of talked about this already, is like what tool is for what. I mean, so it's easy to argue that sword and buckler is something that you can quickly get at for for sort of defense while you're in transit. You know, like you're just walking along and, hey, I'm being robbed. You know, haha, sword and buckler. You have them. You know, what I mean, if you're being mugged, the chances of you defending yourself with a war lance is pretty much zero. You know, like
highway robbery. You know, those. Yeah.
Well, and we can kind of
Hold on,
we can make
10 feet back so I can stab you. Yeah.
well, we can make equivalences with modern stuff, like, you know, you're being attacked by some person. Well, your rifle is not going to help you with that person. You know, a knife will help. Maybe your sidearm, maybe your pistol helps. You know, but the sort of what you're kind of bringing to the table depends upon what the situation is and also how aware of the situation you are. You know, the sword and the buckler is, I would say, like probably the largest, you know, pair of weapons that you could sort of, or like a rapier is a good example of. That's probably the largest weapon you can just sort of quickly have at hand during a street fight if you're surprised a little bit.
We had a sword and buckler event in Arizona, a HEMA event, and we actually experimented with that. We put a sword in the belt, strapped the buckler historically the way it would be, and we had somebody with a knife stand a certain distance from you and charge, kind of like the drill you do with a gun and a knife.
Yeah, the 20-foot rule.
Yeah. And we started with that distance, and then we brought it in to see how close you could get and still bring the sword and buckler to bear fast enough to fend off the person before he could stab you. And we did this in, you know, a little bit of padding, so they would just run in and stab you. And could you bring the weapons to bear before they got the knife in you? It was easy to do at what is it, 22 feet? It was
20 feet is like the, you know, the sort of now sort of almost dogmatic pistol rule. I don't think it's a good rule, but 20 feet is like the pistol draw rule.
20 feet wasn't hard. I think we started 25 feet. 15 feet was really hard. 10 feet was almost impossible. Only one person pulled it off. And the guy attacking him wasn't terribly fast in the attack. And the guy who pulled it off stepped backwards to increase the distance and literally practiced a fast draw for like half an hour before that. And that guy got the coordinator of the event bought that guy a beer. That was I pulled it off at less than 10 feet, but it was almost impossible.
Nice. Yeah, Paul, what were you saying?
But shields. So again, like there's different sizes and therefore different things. I mean, there's pretty goofy looking depictions, paintings, and woodcuts of there were these big dueling shields that people kind of used just the shield to fight each other for judicial duels. Or I've forgotten exactly all the uses of it, but there's like you fight with this giant shield thing. It looks almost like a Gungan shield from Star Wars Episode 1, but you know, like kind of pointy ends.
The
so that's called a shield. You know, a circular, you know, a circular wooden and embossed Viking shield is a shield. You know, a kite shield that you kind of think of when you think of a knight's shield is a shield. You know, like a longer one or a kind of a shorter heater one. They're four different things. You know, the long kite ones are, you know, you can cover a big part of your body with it. That's I'm sure very annoying to carry around. I don't think I've seen anybody carry like a proper big kite shield at an event, because whether it's on their back or they're just carrying it, I'm sure it's very tiring.
Right.
And again, the question is, what do you expect to be? I mean, the same problem you have with a big two-handed sword is, what do you expect to have to do with your hands besides fight with your things? If you need your hands to do anything else, then you have to find a way to, you know, either don't have it or put it on your back.
Right.
And I don't know what the, you know, I'm not going to make any claims about sort of historically if people carried their big shields on their backs. It seems reasonable to assume, but I don't know exactly how. And I'm sure the people could argue about the illustrations about what they might tell us about it, besides just hand through strap and over shoulder. I don't know.
Yeah. I can't believe we've been talking for like almost an hour about this, and the chat is loving you guys, by the way. They're like, please have more episodes of this. Like they're like, so informative. You're blowing people's minds right now. Seriously. For those of you in the chat, enter the word sword into the chat to be entered into the raffle, which Chris will announce at the beginning of Realms of Ukador at 6:30. Do you guys have anything, last things you want to say, promote? Where can we find you on the interwebs?
Garry, you go first.
We'll have to do this again, and I can talk about Victorian weapon carriages for steampunk.
Aha!
Ooh.
Excellent. Carrie's just a man in the wind. He's living off the grid. You can't find him.
It's true.
I don't even know my Instagram. I don't do Instagram or any of that, so I'll have to start.
Do you have Twitter? I think I might have found it.
No, I'm not on Twitter.
It.
I'm not. I'm on Instagram and Facebook.
I have Twitter, but I haven't used it in years because my mental health is just way better, and I like that. And my Instagram, I'm at actor Paul Suda, and then you can subscribe to me on YouTube. My name is Paul Suda. I mean, you can just look up the Tower of Joy fan film.
Yeah,
and
please do. It's amazing. And we've got some things in the works for you guys, which hopefully you all will enjoy. Okay, so, oh my gosh, thank you guys so much for tuning in. Next week, Genevieve, what are we talking about next week?
Next week is going to be amazing. I'm actually really excited for this. Next week's show is called Give Voice to Your Character, where we are going to be talking with some amazing professional voice actors, including Lindsay herself.
Also, we will have Caitlin Robrock, who is the voice of Minnie Mouse. We are going to have Mick Wingert, who is best known as not Jack Black, but Jack Black's voice double. So he does all the Kung Fu Panda that isn't Jack Black and Iron Man. And we'll also have my dear friend Elizabeth. She is my vocal coach. She is a former professional opera singer who runs a YouTube channel called The Charismatic Voice, and she is a huge D&D player. So all of them are going to be talking about, I know, and so many of you brought that up, like, how do I find the voice for this character that I'm role playing? We will have those answers. All right, so again, make sure, go grab a bite to eat, go to the bathroom, but be right back here in 30 minutes at 6:30 for the Realms of Ukador.
Yes, sword in the chat.
Yes. All right, thanks guys. See you next week.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for having us on.
Thanks for having us.